Jetzt hat es jeder verstanden. Natürlich, deswegen fand ich es auch lustig, als ich gesagt fragte, gibt es auch Dolmetscher für die Leute im Kreis? Ja, das siehst du doch aber. Obwohl, vielleicht sieht es nicht. Und darüber haben wir ja gesprochen, in der Pin stand, dass es Dolmetscher gibt. Erstes Kind.
Okay, if you hear my voice, I would be ready if you are. Yes, maybe? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, you can hear my voice. Yes, I'm ready. We are getting everybody back into the room, opening the doors, but then, of course, we will be ready in a second. So if you hear my voice outside, I know it has been a very short lunch break, 27.5 minutes. This is a quick coffee, and I know there is so much to talk about. Selfies are taken, but I think we should go on. And of course, there is so much room and time for conversation later on in our workshops. So it's going to be... Hi, I'm Katie, the moderator. Lovely to meet
Great
you.
to meet you
Lovely.
too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And Katie will call you on stage, and then she will hand over to
Jennifer.
for the moderation.
So, and after I've spoken, I sit back down there because there's a Q&A or comment or whatever. Okay. And for the PowerPoint, the only button I need is green.
Green or back?
Wonderful. So let's continue our conversation. I try to be German again, being on time. Don't let me down, right? Well, yes, merci beaucoup. I know, there is no gong outside. Oh, okay. Next time I bring my little piano with me. Anatoni, yeah, you're here, beautiful. Okay, if you hear my voice outside, this is a kind invitation to join me. I don't want to just talk with myself. I think the people are from the protocol are already helping me in that regard, that I'm not just by myself in bring everybody back in the room. Maybe you noticed that there is a report on your seats. This is the OECD UNDP report, Investing in Climate for Growth and Development, a Case for Enhanced NDCs. You can download it via the QR code, but there's also a printed version now already on your seats. And this is a published version now for the PCD. Final version will be published then in May and June. Okay, there are many seats still to be taken, so please join me. I know it has been a very short lunch break, 27.5 minutes. Our next speaker is already here. He's already on time. That's lovely. So I just need you, ladies and gentlemen. You outside, still with a cup of coffee. I see you. Come and join me for our conversation. I know but we love this energy of conversation. This is exactly what we need for the workshops later on. This spirit of coming together, talking with each other, not just about one another. I know. It is a time of connection and reconnecting. I'm ready for our next session. Are you, Your Excellencies? Do we have another gong? Outside, maybe? Yes. I mean, you could hear that gong, right? This is not... Join me here on stage. Join me. I don't want to be too lonely for our next conversation because we have, of course, so much to debate on and discuss on. Our next session will be also live streamed again. We will be talking on the state of climate science. So please join me. Come inside. You don't want to be the last one entering the room. That all reminds us of the school time. Okay, shall we slowly? We will check in a second. The question is, do we start now? Shall we? Come join us here in the Weltsaal. Also a big thank you to the interpreters here, translating into 9 different languages. We see you and we are so grateful to have you, of course, with us. Thank you so much from the floor. Wonderful. Okay, come join us. Come join us if you hear my voice so we can close the door slowly as we are about to start into our next session. Let's keep the energy, of course, high, the energy of conversation, but we have, of course, so many other opportunities in the workshops later on to really keep that going. Now I would love to have your attention. I don't know if you can hear me outside of this room. That would be maybe quite fruitful. Otherwise, I'm just talking to you, but that's okay. We have fun. We start. Yes, we keep the energies high, right? Am signalo. Salam no. Good. Good. And of course, I mean, you as an Ethiopian, you know the strong coffee, the buna. I hope that German coffee already was okay. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, I think we are slowly getting ready. I mean, this is also beauty of coming together, right? Alors, bienvenue. Okay, we're closing the door, so we can be spot on who's late. Your Excellencies, welcome back here in the Weltsaal at the Federal Foreign Office for the Petersberg Climate Dialogue. And we have now an input coming up on the state of climate science. And for that, I directly hand over to the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. With us today is Johan Rockström. Johan, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, and welcome back after lunch. What I want to do is provide you with a science update, and just to connect back to where we were this morning. Scientifically, the task over the coming 7 months and 2 weeks is absolutely clear. We need to remove 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the global economy to have any chance of holding the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway according to what science says is necessary. The representation in the room also emphasizing collective action is scientifically so strongly supported because we share the same small blue planet and the same collective action on one atmosphere that we cannot negotiate with. I want to give you the story of why we need to remove 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the global economy over this calendar year. I want to share with you the fact that we are today scientifically facing 2 reasons for deep concern that go beyond even the climate crisis that we've declared over the past 5 years. Number one is the signs we're now seeing of accelerated rate of warming. And the second is the question, are we seeing an Earth system that is losing its ability to buffer and dampen the stress that we're causing from human-induced climate change? Is the planet losing resilience? The evidence of accelerated warming comes out of course, the 5 different independent sources of temperature observations, where we have, as you have already highlighted today, breached through 1.5 degrees Celsius for the first time during 1 calendar year. That does not mean that we've breached the Paris 10-year moving average, but here is the concern. Since the 1970s until 2014, we have the big concern, which is the linear increase at roughly 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade of warming with aggregation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And then suddenly over the last decade, the rate jumps up to almost 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade. What is happening? We don't really have the answer, but this creates a serious concern of a change in the climate sensitivity of the planet, which of course would reduce drastically the remaining carbon budget and change completely the necessities of the speed of reduction in emissions. And it's the same in the ocean. Just look at these numbers. The gray lines here is from 26 to 2022. Again, very concerning global increasing heat in the ocean. 90% of the heat from fossil fuel burning is in the ocean. And then suddenly you see the black arrow here, the jump, a 0.3 degrees Celsius jump suddenly in only 2 years, 2023 and 2024. Admittedly, this is an El Niño year. We also know it's a very active solar cycle, but it cannot explain the entire jump. And what is more concerning, look at 2025. Coming into March, where we are right now, we're still oscillating at this remarkably higher level of temperatures in the ocean, which should not have happened because we are now in a La Niña phase, which normally leads to a cooling of the global average temperature. What is happening? That's the big question. Are we seeing the first signs of a planet losing its capacity to buffer the pressures that we're causing on the planet? And that is something that we today are seeing massive amounts of investigation into, both in terms of are we seeing changing in human forcing, meaning our pressures to the system, or are we even, which I would argue is even worse, are we seeing a change in the feedback dynamics in the planet, the capacity of the planet to buffer the changes we're causing? There's a big debate around this. The World Meteorological Organization published just last week the state of the climate system for 2024, pinpointing the fact that, yes, there are natural variabilities here. El Niño, solar cycle, even a volcanic eruption in 2022, the Hunga Tonga volcanic eruption, but that is only explaining 1/3 to a half. We also need to factor in this, which is technical, admittedly, but I think everyone who really deals with climate action needs to now focus in on the fact that what is climate change. It is a human-caused energy imbalance. We're injecting heat into the system, watts per square meter. That's what you see here. Look at that fat line, which is the remarkable increase in heat into the system. Up until the black line you see vertically here, which is in 2010, carbon dioxide and total forcing followed each other. The big fat line is the total forcing, and the magenta line is carbon dioxide from oil, coal, and gas. How could this be? Well, it was because you see the line under the zero line is the cooling caused by air pollutants. So we have a massive paradox in the world, which is that roughly 1/2 degrees Celsius has been camouflaged, hidden away from air pollution, which, by the way, prematurely kills 7 to 8 million people prematurely every year. So one massive environmental problem has been hiding a significant portion of another massive problem, which we are discussing today, namely climate change. From 2010 onwards, you see how this line starts going closer to zero, which is because we're cleaning up the cities in the world, because we have a 2020 policy of forbidding sulfates from bunker diesel in commercial shipping. We are simply solving the air pollution problem, which is one reason why we're bumping up the temperatures very rapidly, causing this black line to suddenly deviate off, injecting more heat than just carbon dioxide alone. The second explanation is that the planet is getting darker. Albedo, meaning that more solar radiation is absorbed on the planet. That's what you see in all these black spots here. Why is this happening? Well, it's major problems because of ice melt leading to darker surfaces, tree lines moving further northwards, but also cloud dynamics because we're changing the whole hydrological cycle. The color of the planet determines how much solar radiation that is absorbed on the surface, and it's getting warmer. And finally, the biggest concern, are we losing carbon uptake capacity in nature? What you see above the zero line here is fossil fuel burning over the past 150 years. Below the zero line, in dark green, is carbon uptake in the ocean. The light green is carbon uptake on land. Look at that graph. The more we stress the planet, the more the planet biogeochemically has been helping us, absorbing 50% of carbon dioxide in the ocean and intact nature on land. Now we're seeing the first signs of cracks in this system. Here you have a whole set of scientific papers showing how the temperate forest in Canada, the temperate forest in Scandinavia, the Brazilian part of the Amazon rainforest, and just look at this data from Finland, which just came out of the authorities in Finland recently, showing how the greenhouse gas emissions in Finland going down, the upper curve, but how the carbon sink in forests have collapsed. And today, over the past 3 years, Finnish forests are actually a net source, not even a net sink anymore. So this is what leads us to the conclusion that we may no longer rely on the stability and the buffering capacity of the planet, which would change directly the pace by which we need to decarbonize the global economy. Add to this tipping points. Tipping points are the big biogeophysical systems that have multiple stable states and control and regulate the stability of the climate system. We've mapped them. Here they are, the 16 big climate tipping element systems which are contributing to a stable climate. What I told you before here had no tipping point dynamics, but here you have them. 6 of them are up in the Arctic region. 1 of them is the overturning of heat in the Atlantic. The Amazon rainforest is there. 3 of them are down in Antarctica. The coral reef systems are there. They're spread across the entire planet. We have mapped them. For the first time, you see the list of 16 here. You see the burning embers diagram on scientific range of risk. The further to the magenta or to the purple line, the higher the risk is to cross a tipping point. This is the temperature range at which these are likely to tip. The small circles is the median average temperature assessment. Look at the top 5 here. Here we have those that are likely to tip already at 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, all the tropical coral reef systems, abrupt thawing of permafrost, and collapse of the Labrador Sea current. Dear friends, this is scientific evidence that 1.5 is not a goal, it's not a target, it's a physical limit. You don't want to exceed it because you're likely to cause irreversible changes that would even further amplify the rate of warming. But science actually tells us that we're wrong on one of these, and that's what you see here. The largest and richest ecosystem on land on planet Earth is the Amazon basin. This system stores over 100 gigatons of carbon, which is more than the remaining global carbon budget to have any chance of holding 1.5 degrees Celsius. Climate science shows that we may tip the Amazon rainforest at roughly 3 to 5 degrees Celsius of warming. So a very small risk. You know, we are heading towards 3 degrees Celsius, a disastrous future by the end of the century, but, you know, we are very unlikely passing beyond that. But when you bring in ecology and hydrology and forest science, the planetary boundaries, the whole picture changes. The assessment is that already at 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, we risk tipping the whole basin over to a degraded savanna state if we lose more than 25% of canopy cover because we change so distinctly the hydrology in the system. We are, to quote Professor Carlos Nobres, Brazilian leading climate and ecology scientist, very close to a tipping point in the Amazon rainforest. So we cannot separate nature from climate if we are going to have a chance of holding on to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, what I also want to share with you is that 1.5 degrees Celsius scientifically is, in the mainstream of the evidence we have, still an open window. But it's not open by never exceeding it. What you see here are the IPCC scenarios that can still hold 1.5, but after overshoot. We conclude that that is our only option today. What you see here will be breaching 1.5 somewhere between 2030 and 2035, so very soon, having a 0.1 to 0.3 degrees Celsius overshoot period until we may come back, at best, to 1.5 by the end of this century. It requires full phasing out of fossil fuels, but it also requires a second criteria, and that is the following. Why would the planet come back after us stopping the emissions from coal, oil, and gas? Well, the answer is simple. It is the resilience in the planet. It's the ocean system, it's biodiversity, it's fresh water, it's nitrogen and phosphorus, it is land, it is all the ecosystems that can continue to buffer and dampen both heat and carbon. We need, therefore, whether we like it or not, even if we focus only on the Paris Agreement, to take on the whole planet. And we have a framework for this, the Planetary Boundary Framework, which quantifies for all the 9 environmental processes that regulate the stability of the planet, what is needed to be done to be able to keep the health of the planet intact. 6 of the 9 boundaries, that's what you see here, are transgressed. So it's not so surprising that we're starting to see these signs of weakening because we're losing too much biodiversity, consuming too much fresh water, overloading with too much nitrogen and phosphorus, and degrading too much of the land systems. So we're doing a double mistake. We are not reducing emissions, and we are unfortunately not keeping the resilience intact. And just to close, I promise, this is having impacts on the global economy. We're seeing 7% loss of income by 2035 if we continue on the path today, a report released at the World Economic Forum. We've recently done a study on what are the commitments already at 1.5 degrees Celsius for the global economy, which would potentially lead to a 19% loss of GDP by 2050. Not only that, that assessment has a very, very dramatic inequity dimension. Just look at how it hits so much harder on the global south with 30 to 35% loss in GDP from here to 2050, while you have the blue areas that nominally could even benefit economically on the short term. So we're talking big numbers, big impacts. The same with the food system. The food system has a market value of $10 trillion US, but the real cost because of climate change, biodiversity loss, and health impacts largely very exceeds this number. But to transform the food system may cost us way, way, way less than those numbers. So we're talking here of win-win opportunities for food, for energy, and finally, the Global Commission on Economics of Water showed the same thing. Climate change is changing the hydrology, impacting on freshwater availability, having double-digit impacts on GDP growth, particularly in low-income countries. So on all economic assessments today, both on energy, on biodiversity, on food, and on freshwater, they show the same conclusion. We're seeing double-digit impacts on GDP income loss if we continue on business as usual as today. So it's truly a juncture where we need to start, as has been emphasized so many times here this morning, to start implementation and delivery, not only promise new commitments. And that is actually 13
Johan
minutes.
Rockström, thank you so much. And sorry for cutting you short.
You stressed a little bit.
I stressed you, no. Thank you so much. so many interesting insights. And of course, we continue our conversation now because we'd like to hear more about solutions and the opportunities when it comes to climate action. And for that, I welcome, of course, two virtual guests here at the Petersberg Climate Dialogue. With us is Matthias Kollmann, the OECD Secretary General, and Achim Steiner, UNDP Administrator. I hope you can hear us well. Greetings from Berlin.
We can hear you well.
Hello.
Oh.
And good morning, of course, to New York or wherever you're based. We also have now in the next conversation Joe Tyndall, the OECD Director for the Environment. So please join me here also on stage. And we have the UNDP Global Director of Climate Change, Casey Flynn, also with us. These are two of your seats, so please join me here on stage. And for this conversation, we also be joined by Selwyn Hart, Special Advisor to the Secretary General on Climate Action and Just Transition. And for the tough questions, I hand over to Jennifer Morgan.
Thank you, and a huge thank you to Johan Rockström, who managed in 15 minutes, I think, to give us a picture of what's at stake. And now, you know, we heard this morning we wanted to have science and economics really at the core of our discussion. And so I'm very pleased that we have these live virtual inputs from the OECD Secretary General, Matthias Kollmann, and the UNDP Administrator, Achim Steiner. We're very thankful to both of you. We know you're in other meetings, that you've joined us here virtually. We're going to get right to it. Mr. Kollmann, I'll give you the floor first. I know you have a hard stop at 2, so if you disappear, we know what's going on. But thank you for being here, and over to you, Mr. Kollmann. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer, and good afternoon, everyone. And it's great to be here with my good friend and valued colleague, Achim Steiner from the UNDP, and indeed also my colleague here at the OECD, Joe Tyndall. So thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts on nationally determined contributions and their role in climate and economic policy. I mean, as you know, at the OECD, we are fully committed to help secure the global net zero by 2050. And what we bring to the table are our multidisciplinary capabilities, helping to deliver better policies through our data and information sharing, our evidence-based mutual learning and advice, the development of best practices and standards, but also by providing a platform for inclusive multilateral dialogue to help facilitate a better and more effective international cooperation. And this includes supporting governments with the design of their nationally determined contributions, the foundation for achieving our shared climate goals. Today, we are presenting the highlights of an OECD UN Development Programme report, which shows how ambitious nationally determined contributions, if underpinned by robust implementation and investment plans, can provide economic opportunities, unlock investment, and indeed support sustainable development and growth. The analysis that we're releasing today shows how proactive climate action reduces economic risks, protects against systemic shocks, and safeguards long-term prosperity. In fact, we estimate that by helping to reduce climate-related damages, strengthening nationally determined contributions could increase global GDP by up to 13% over the next 75 years. The benefits are not limited, of course, to economic growth. Our analysis also highlights the potential of climate mitigation policies to advance other important national public policy priorities, including in relation to public health, reliable access to energy, as well as poverty reduction. Joe Tyndall, our Director for Environment, will provide further details of this analysis in her presentation. But to help realize these benefits, the OECD is supporting countries in developing and implementing nationally determined contributions for 2025 that are both ambitious as well as achievable. First, by tracking the ambition and implementation of current climate commitments. Indeed, our 2024 Climate Action Monitor shows that current nationally determined contributions amount to a collective reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 14% by 2030 compared to 2022 levels, which is well below the estimated 43% in emissions reduction that is required to keep global temperature increases below 2 degrees Celsius, consistent with the Paris Agreement. And data from our climate actions and policies measurement framework, which measures the stringency of climate policies across 52 economies, also shows the need to accelerate implementation of commitments. Environmental policy stringency increased by only 1% in 2022 and 2% in 2023, compared to an average 10% annual increase between 2010 and 2021. Second, we provide policy advice to ensure that nationally determined contributions are financially viable and effective in stimulating investment. The OECD IEA, a climate change expert group analysis, shows that nationally determined contributions currently lack sufficient information on how they will be delivered, which means that investors in the private sector don't have the necessary certainty in order to commit the necessary financing. And to address this challenge, we recommend breaking down nationally determined contributions to a more granular sectoral level with more detailed costings of investment needs and financing strategies, and building confidence that nationally determined contributions are achievable by providing detailed information on supporting legislation and regulations, and by ensuring stronger coordination across whole of government, so that nationally determined contributions are no longer developed in an isolated way by the Ministry of the Environment or Climate Change, but are anchored in overall national development and economic growth strategies. Third, by helping to ensure national efforts are globally more effective and better coordinated through our inclusive forum on carbon mitigation approaches. The OECD's IFCMA, as it's called in short, is designed to help optimize the global emissions reduction impact of emissions reduction efforts in individual countries around the world through better data and information sharing about the comparative effectiveness of different carbon mitigation approaches undertaken around the world, through evidence-based mutual learning and advice on policy best practice, and through that inclusive multilateral dialogue involving advanced, emerging and developing economies. And the aim here being to facilitate more coherent and better coordinated mitigation policies across countries, with a view to maximize positive cross-border spillover effects through shared innovation, cost savings, and shared benefits from the climate transition, and at the same time avoiding negative cross-border spillovers such as carbon leakage or trade distortions that could come from different policy approaches in different jurisdictions. We're working towards developing an IFCMA database of mitigation policies and an assessment of the comparative emissions reduction impacts by the end of this year. And that data and analysis will help to identify further opportunities to make better decisions and to further enhance the impact of nationally determined contributions. So in conclusion, there's a great deal to do to ensure that nationally determined contributions take us to where we need to be in terms of progress towards our shared climate goals. And here at the OECD and the UNDP working together, we believe that we do have the tools, the data and the analysis to help countries get there and to help ensure we do it in a way that delivers economic benefits as well as achieving the climate objectives we need the world to achieve. Thank you very much, Jennifer, and I hope I didn't take too long.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Economic benefits and growth and climate action. Achim Steiner, UNDP has also been involved in this report, but also, of course, across the board on development. What are your thoughts on this? If I can hand over, I think you're in Istanbul, so thank you also for joining us.
I am indeed, and guten Tag to Berlin. Boa tarde, meu amigo André Corrado-Lago. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. And Matthias, thank you for laying out so clearly, first of all, something that the OECD is associated with, which is clarity and analysis in data and empirical research when it comes to pathways for economies. And us joining forces as OECD and UNDP, in a sense, provides us with a 360-degree perspective, if you want, on where we are in this long-standing debate about the economy and climate change action. And I'm very grateful that we actually listened to Johan just now, because the imperative to act, I think that argument has long been closed. the ability to act is one that continues to be, let's say, presented with a degree of ambiguity and more and more often also in certain quarters with a degree of, let's say, skepticism and even an attempt to perhaps reverse the level of ambition that we have already agreed on. So the kind of glimpse onto a report that in its full form we will present in a few weeks' time, OECD and UNDP have really tried to not hypothesize and only model, but actually draw on the evidence that is now available across literally dozens of economies across the globe. And the basic question that we wanted to examine, as Matthias already alluded, can we envisage pathways where actually economic growth, GDP growth and development thrive because there are climate action investments? And I think, as you already heard from Matthias just now, to those who want to continue to sow doubts, there will always be certain things we don't know for sure. But the overwhelming evidence that we now have available is that, first of all, we are not regressing if we invest in climate transitions. Secondly, we actually see a modest increase in GDP growth that may look small at first from the point of view of incremental. But let's just assume for a moment, if you do that over the next 20 to 25 years or even to the end of the century, you're beginning to talk about growth rates that translate into literally billions and billions of additional economic investments and also returns on investments. The report estimates that by 2050, high-income countries will see more than a 60% increase in GDP per capita growth, while low-income countries, and this is a very important message and not one that we should simply be taking for granted because that was not always as evident in recent decades, while low-income countries could experience a remarkable 124% rise from 2025 levels. This is extremely important because clearly the transitions are disruptive. And we know that in the more developed economies, the legacy transition is immensely complex and difficult and certainly unsettling. In many developing countries, it is the ability to actually invest in the basic infrastructure that would allow these transitions in energy systems that remain a major challenge. And where this analysis leads us to is that actually not only is there a macroeconomic return on investment, for instance, the estimates also show that for extreme poverty, we would estimate with a current ambitious level of NDC investment, 175 million people could be lifted out of extreme poverty globally, not in 2050, by decade's end. These are immensely powerful figures, and they are not imagined scenarios. They are essentially derived from assuming that there are levels of investment, that there are very smart transition strategies, and that we are also able to address what remains an extremely frustrating and, let's say, basic reality. Access to finance to enable these transitions to happen is simply not materializing, particularly not for least developed countries, for low-income economies, and therefore we do need to look at how that $2 trillion economy in renewables that our colleagues in the IEA estimate last year out of a $3 trillion economy investment in the energy sector can actually become a $3 trillion economy of investments for every country. And for that, there is something very important here, which is not so much about the science of climate change, nor the economic metrics. It's about a fundamental principle, collaboration. And for collaboration to succeed, we cannot only appeal to one another, as we have done for many years, we also have to create the conditions for collaboration to succeed. One of them is clearly the de-risking of finance, the attraction of financial capital and private sector investment, but also NDCs. NDCs have proven to be a success story, despite many of, let's say, those who left Paris wondering whether they would ever translate into something meaningful. And let's be clear, for most of this period, they have been ways of articulating policy intentions. But increasingly, we are seeing them graduate from policy intentions to being integral to national development planning, national investment strategies, and above all, providing also the international community, the well over 190 nations that have signed up to the Paris Agreement, with a foundation upon which to build trust in one another, and also a form of mutual accountability that, some are not simply sitting on the sidelines while others are leaning forward. to be able to support those NDCs, as you know, UNDP has in recent years been a center of gravity within the United Nations family, and again at the Secretary General's request, very much part of the offer to countries right now to prepare the next generation of NDCs. And I want to urge you that if you are sometimes perhaps wondering whether coming to Belém with an NDC may be not a good idea, hedging or not having an NDC, I think would be a great setback for the foundations upon which we need to build progress and trust and the ability to move forwards. To have an ambitious NDC will be critical, because otherwise the divergence between where science tells us we need to be and where our economies are reflecting where we are simply becomes no longer credible. So far, the Paris Agreement is a success story, notwithstanding many of the criticisms that arise when you design something for 8 billion citizens almost today, having to synchronize their actions under extremely different and differing conditions. Let me end by just noting that in the way that we are thinking forward right now, it is not only GDP growth, and again, Johan, at the end of your presentation, you made a quick reference to it. We're actually talking about losing perhaps up to a third of our GDP by in this century, if we do not have these NDCs driving the kinds of investments and transitions that are envisaged. So again, coming back to collaboration, the current divestment, the current defunding of some of the fundamental tenets of international collaboration and climate financing, but also development cooperation, they may be, and hopefully will only be, short-term signals of perhaps developments in domestic political terms. Leaving them undiscussed will actually be a major problem, because our ability to collectively invest, and this is not homing in only on public finance, fundamental to private finance, to investments, particularly in developing economies, is a public finance platform on which the multiples of private sector investment can succeed. So NDCs are a central piece of maintaining the Paris Agreement's integrity, but also to be able to mobilize the kind of financing that is needed, especially if we succeed in getting the NDCs to being integral to national development plans, national investment strategies, and again, our work as UNDP with over 90 countries on the integrated national financing frameworks, the NDC support program, all these are offers to enable countries to arrive in Belém with NDCs that are not meant to be an instrument or expression for compliance. They're actually a projection from a national sovereignty point of view of how to think about the future of development, rooted in a nation's reality, including its politics and economics, but acknowledging that without the rest of the world coming together, all of this may just be theory. Thank you so much for inviting us today. And again, I want to thank Matthias. It's been an extremely constructive and productive collaboration. I hope we have all helped you to have more evidence as you also return home to have these very intense discussions over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Achim. And I think having you here with Matthias Cormann to share this, I mean, to let colleagues know, the reason why we commissioned this report was because of last year's PCD discussion, where we talked about the barriers, the questions that are the economics that we all face at home, the financing, et cetera. And therefore we thought, let's bring in some numbers. Let's bring in some expertise from two of the top world organizations on this. And because we need to both understand the socioeconomics of this, and we also need to understand better the costs of inaction. And so we wanted to ask, first, thank you for the teams who delivered this at record speed. And there'll be the full report, and you have the short version on your chairs. But if I could hand over first to you, Joe, to give a little bit more depth, just to give everyone here a set of kind of understanding. We'll then have some quick interventions. I'm going to try and make that a dialogue. There's lots of case studies in this as well. You will find your countries, some of your countries, they couldn't put everyone in. So, so to make it quite practical. Joe, over to you.
Just the microphone.
Thank you, Jennifer, and it's a real honour to be here today. Hopefully somebody can load we've just got a couple of PowerPoint slides to accompany what I'm going to say. But I think there were two reasons